This video will cover the basics of cross-examination in debate, so you can learn how to answer and ask questions in a debate round. As a lesson preview, this lesson will cover first what cross-examination is, second, good questions to ask in CX, third, viable asking strategies, and fourth, viable answering strategies. So, what is cross-examination? Cross-examination is a questioning period where you ask your opponent questions to get a strategic leverage in later speeches. Cross-examination is often 3 minutes long at a time, meaning that if you are the one answering the question, that you will be answering the questions for 3 minutes and vice versa. And cross-examination speeches occurs right after a constructive speech. So, cross-examination periods can be used for clarification, but it's better to use it to force your opponent to make concessions to your arguments. A basic tip that you should follow is to pre-write your questions before rounds. Even if you don't know what your opponent's going to run on their case, there's always going to be some general questions that you can always ask that apply to generally most of your opponent's cases. So it's always good to plan ahead and write down some strategies that you could have before your round. So let's talk about good questions that you can ask in cross-examination. The first good type of question are how questions. Now, how questions are usually formatted like, how does X contribute to Y, or how does X happen? Now, these questions don't have any strategic leverage because they're solely used for clarification purposes. The second question that you could ask is if or how questions. Now, these questions are a little bit more strategic because you can ask questions like, if the Inflation Reduction Act passed, what's the point of the AF? Or, if your case talks about religious terrorism, how is news propaganda relevant? So these kind of questions are good for testing your opponent's case based on existing information that contradicts or segues away from their case. So you're able to shave off areas that your opponent is defending but not really is relevant to their case, or you can test their information and their knowledge. On the other hand, when you're asking in cross-examination, good strategies that you want to keep in mind is first, make them agree to A, one of your arguments, B, a fact that supports your side, or C, something bad that their case endorses. Now, the second type of strategy that you should keep in mind when asking cross-examination is if you simply just need clarification. There are 3 steps. The first one is to ask them the question. Second, once you've gotten what you've needed, i.e., if your opponent said that what you needed to clear up, try to end that answer politely because you need to ask more questions in order for you to clear things up. So once you've gotten what you needed and you want to move the discussion elsewhere, you can use phrases like thank you or I understand what you're saying. And so the third rule of thumb when you're strategizing on how to just ask questions because you need clarification is try not to let them spend more than 20 seconds answering your question. If they answer your question within that 20 seconds and they still go on, you can move on from there. But if they still didn't answer your question, you can try to cut them off and then re-ask them the question or phrase the question in a more simple manner so they can respond to it. So some good strategies when answering in cross-examination, there are 3 different strategies. So the first one is that if they ask a very broad question, like, are you endorsing X? Are you endorsing the AF plan even if it's really expensive? Or are you endorsing a plan that hurts the least well off? You can answer this question or try to avoid it by saying something like, that's not what my case or evidence is saying. It's actually saying that, and then you can rephrase or summarize your case. And in this way, not only are you sort of moving away from the question because you obviously don't want to get trapped in a difficult situation, but you're also able to extend your case and re-explain it to the judge. The second strategy that you can take is if they say, read me a line that says X is good, or read me a line that says Y is bad. You can circumvent that question by saying, in order to understand your question, my X evidence does a good job and says X, Y, and Z. And the third type of question that your opponent could ask you is X thing good? Yes or no? These binary questions may be good for your opponent, and so instinctively, you want to answer that question by saying the answer isn't as simple as a yes or no question because there are always exceptions. And what our case is saying is that, and then you would extend your case again. A good rule of thumb is that if you think you're stuck in a tough spot, try to move around the question. But if they don't ask difficult questions, use your CX time as a speech to develop your own case. That's it for cross-examination, and I hope you learned a lot about how to answer and ask questions in cross-examination in a very strategic manner.